For the past few days, I've been reading all kinds of creepy Reddit stories from people who had scary run-ins with stalkers, strange neighbors, and really weird people. Thank you for listening to my story. Let me know in the comments where and what time you're tuning in from. It means more than. It reminds me that I'm not alone in this. And if you'd like to share your story with me, feel free to email it. I'll drop my email in the description below. Now let me tell you what really happened. After going through so many of them, I decided it was time I shared my own experience too. This story started about 5 years ago. At the time, it was just me, my brother Alec, and our mom. We were moving a lot because my mom was struggling to find a full-time job that paid well. Sometimes we had to leave in the middle of the night when rent got too high or we couldn't stay anymore. Things changed for the better when my mom got hired at a well-known lock company in a nearby city. They even gave her money to rent a house close to the factory. For the first time in a long while, things started to look good again. The move itself wasn't anything special, and the first few weeks went by pretty normally. Still, to us kids, this new house felt like a dream. The neighborhood was full of working-class families and kids to hang out with. There was always something to do, and we were finally starting to feel like life was normal again. Ever since our dad passed when I was about 10, life had been up and down, but now things were finally feeling like they used to, at least for a little while. We all got back into our routines. Mom worked long hours, and Alec and I went to school like usual. That's when we started hearing strange noises. I was the last one to really notice them. Alec mentioned hearing something once, but I didn't think anything of it. Mom didn't say anything either until one morning at breakfast, we all heard it together. It sounded like a phone chime, twice, right after the other. That morning, the three of us looked at each other, realizing none of us imagined it. It was a weird moment, but we tried to laugh it off, thinking maybe it was just a bird outside. It wasn't the first strange sound, but we didn't dwell on it. We pushed it aside and went on with our day like usual. But that moment made us all more alert. We agreed to bring up anything unusual we noticed from now on. In the weeks that followed, the weird sounds kept happening. One of us would hear bumps on the floor or scratching noises. We started mentally noting them, but didn't really panic. On weekends, we'd sit together and share what each of us had heard that week. One weekend, we decided to look around the house more closely. That's when we found a small hole that led into the attic. We figured maybe a raccoon or squirrel had gotten in, and that's what was making the noise. Still, there were some sounds that didn't make sense, even if it was a small animal. The idea helped calm our nerves, but we still had doubts. Then things got even weirder. Food started disappearing. This part of the story hit me hardest. I'd always had problems with my weight growing up, and it was something I struggled with a lot. My mom, who had always been thin and didn't understand what I was going through, assumed I was the one sneaking food. When she noticed things missing, she blamed me right away. This led to a big fight and caused a deep crack in my relationship with her, one we still haven't fully fixed to this day. But I know you're not here to hear about my family issues. You want the creepy part, and here it comes. I think we'd been living in that house for 5 months when everything fell apart. The noises still happened, and by now we were convinced the house was haunted. My mom and I barely talked, and Alec was also dealing with problems of his own. He had breathing issues that acted like bronchitis. He was a freshman in high school, playing in the school band, and sometimes he'd get so sick he couldn't do anything. That week, though, he was doing okay and even went out of town on a school trip. But soon after he got there, his symptoms got worse again, so they sent him back home to recover. He came home during the day when neither Mom nor I was there. At first, everything seemed fine, quiet even. Then he started hearing sounds from the front bathroom. He called out, thinking maybe one of us had come back early, but no one answered. Not thinking too much of it, he walked up and opened the bathroom door. That's when he saw a man, someone he didn't know, standing there, half-dressed and staring straight at him. The man began to move toward him, and Alec ran for his life. He bolted out the front door and ran straight to the neighbor's house for help. He stayed there until the police arrived and finished checking the house. What they found destroyed any sense of safety we had. When I got home, Mom was still outside with the police. I had no idea what was going on at first, but once I heard the full story, I was completely terrified. The police didn't find much inside the house until they searched the basement. That's where they found a bedroll hidden under the stairs, behind a pile of boxes. It looked like someone had been living there for a while. My stomach dropped. I couldn't believe it. I even freaked out for a minute. When I finally calmed down, I asked about Alec. He was still across the street, refusing to come back inside. He was shaking, and sweat was pouring down his face. After the police left, we all tried to go back to normal, but that didn't work. Everything had changed. Alec eventually came back home, but he was never the same again. He had terrible nightmares and couldn't sleep unless Mom or I checked the basement first. His breathing problems got worse too. I was deeply affected as well. I couldn't relax at all while inside the house. Mom didn't say much about it, but you could see on her face that she wasn't sleeping either. The fear hung over all of us. No one had been arrested, and that only made it worse. We did our best to comfort each other, but it didn't help. 7 months after we moved in, we packed up and left. We moved to a condo with no basement or attic. I stayed there for 2 more years until I got my own place across town, where I still live today. Life has been better ever since we left that house. I'm healthy, in a loving relationship, and happier than I've ever been. My mom ended up marrying a nice guy from her job, and even Alec is doing a lot better. His breathing problems slowly disappeared after we moved. The doctors found out it was likely caused by huge amounts of black mold we had been breathing in. After that, the health department got involved, but by then the house had already been torn down. I don't think this is a confession of guilt. Alec's nightmares have slowly faded with time. He says he doesn't think about what happened much anymore. I'm not totally sure if I believe him, but I'm just glad he seems okay. The man from the basement was never caught. As far as I know, they still don't know who he was. He could have gotten in through an unlocked window or door. Maybe he made a copy of the key. We used to keep our keys hanging in plain sight near the kitchen, so it wouldn't have been hard for him to find them and come and go as he pleased. From his hiding spot, he probably heard us talk about our plans and knew exactly when the house would be empty. That still gives me chills. He might have thought he could stay there forever, until Alec came home early and caught him. It might not matter now whether he got arrested. The 3 of us have mostly moved on. Time has helped heal the worst of it. But sometimes I do wonder, did our intruder just move on to another house? Maybe someone else has a basement like ours, a place no one checks often. Maybe he's hiding right now in someone else's home. Could it be yours? Are you sure no one's living underneath your house, listening to every step, every word? Maybe it's worth going down to check, just to be sure. Somewhere out on the windy plains of Middle America, there is a house. It looks like any normal house. Nothing about it catches your eye or makes it seem unusual. But this house once hid something very dark, a secret that stayed buried for a long time, until now. You see, not too long ago, this was my home. I was one of a small group of young men who lived in the dark, cold basement of that house. There were 5 of us in total. We didn't live there by choice, but because we were told to. Our days were full of hard work, and our nights were filled with dreams. We often dreamed about being free. Luckily for us, one brave person would help make that dream come true. Because of her, I'm able to share this story today. I guess I should begin with the bigger picture before I talk more about myself. I won't be using any real names or exact places. Everything started long before I was born. It was sometime in the mid-1960s when a young, charming preacher created a devoted following. His beliefs were very different from other Christian groups. He taught that Mary Magdalene was given the power to speak the word of God by Jesus after he went to heaven. According to him, Mary became the true head of the Christian church. Over time, he claimed this power was passed down through generations and ended with him, the Holy Father, who said he could trace his line back to Mary herself. Oddly enough, people believed this, and the church grew fast. By 1980, there were over 3,500 members. But as the years went by, more and more people left the church for many reasons. When I was born in 1993, there were only about 125 members left. A few years before I was born, the church bought a small plot of land in the upper Midwest. The people built everything there by hand. Everyone was expected to live on the property, and all work was divided among us equally. It was a lot like the communes people had in the 60s and 70s. I'm guessing our church copied that style. I won't go into all the details, but I think you get the idea. It was like living in an old farming village. Most things were still done by hand, even though machines weren't forbidden. People were proud of doing things the hard way. This is the kind of life I grew up with. Now let me explain what led to us being locked away in a basement. From the beginning, women had a very special place in the church. They were seen as leaders and teachers to the younger or newer members. Except for the leader himself, no man had any real power. This was just how things were, and no one really questioned it. A man had to be married to stay in the group or even join it. In later years, the leader made it very hard for new couples to get married. That meant younger guys who couldn't find someone to marry or didn't want to marry at all were kicked out once they turned 21. Toward the end, we were treated like nothing more than workers, just strong hands to do jobs around the place. Then came the biggest change of all in 1998. The Holy Father decided that all boys would be moved to the youth dorm when they reached puberty, saying it was to protect everyone's dignity. But youth dorm was just a fancy name for the basement. It was just a plain, cold, and musty room. This new rule made the already weak church even more divided. Sadly, my parents were true believers, so we stayed. Only about 75 people were left by then. When I turned 13, I followed the rule and moved into the basement. It was hard to adjust at first, but I became close friends with the other guys down there. I used to joke and call us prisoners. From early morning until late evening, we worked nonstop. Sundays were our only break. We'd attend morning service, and the rest of the day was ours, unless you didn't volunteer to do more work. If you didn't, you had to stay in the basement. We went through much worse during our time there, but I still can't bring myself to talk about some of it. Maybe it's better if those parts stay hidden. Then, in 2010, someone unexpected changed everything. Ruth was just another member of the group, but since she was a woman, she had a small leadership role. It wasn't a big position, but it still gave her some power. What nobody knew was that Ruth had been collecting a lot of information secretly. She was building a case against the Holy Father. On her trips to town, she met with police and even lawyers from the district attorney's office. They were very interested in how the church treated its male members. But what finally brought him down wasn't that. It was tax fraud. He'd been lying about his money, and that's what got him thrown in prison. When Ruth finally handed over all her documents to the authorities, the church was shut down completely. A judge said the way we had been treated was cruel and unacceptable. We left the basement for the last time that same week. Everything after that was handled quietly to avoid bringing shame to the nearby community. When I finally got the chance to meet Ruth and ask her why she did what she did, she told me something surprising. The way men were treated in the group had always upset her, especially how her own father was treated. Then the year before she came forward, she had secretly fallen in love with one of the boys in the dorm. She knew they probably wouldn't be allowed to marry unless something changed. But what truly made her act was what she found while digging. The things the Holy Father had done shocked her. Her goal wasn't to destroy the church, but over time she saw it couldn't be saved. It was too connected to him. I really looked up to her for her bravery and for caring enough to do something so big and dangerous for the people she loved. Thankfully, she was able to start over and now lives a good, peaceful life. My wife and I even named our first daughter Ruth in her honor. We want her to grow up inspired by the woman she was named after. We hope she learns to be just as strong and selfless. I can't think of a better example for our daughter to follow. Before I end, I want to talk about the other guys from the basement. Despite everything we went through, it looks like none of us were permanently harmed by it. All of us except one are now married and have families. Mark, my best friend from those days, has been with his partner for a while now, and they're thinking about a future together too. Even though this story has many sad and troubling parts, I want to end it on a hopeful note. I know there are many people around the world who are going through hard times or have already been through a lot of pain, but I don't want my story to just be about suffering. I want it to show that hope is real. Remember this, even when everything feels dark, don't give up. Keep going and keep believing. Better days are always just around the corner. He guessed it might be old pipes or sound echoing through utility lines. That might make sense if the voices were random, but these were full conversations. People actually talking to each other in a space that shouldn't exist. I started spending more time in the basement, listening. The voices came more often, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week. I began recognizing the pattern. The man had a slow, calm voice. The woman's was lighter, more energetic. The kid only spoke now and then, usually short little comments. One night I heard something that truly scared me. I was down there fixing a faucet when the voices started up again. But this time, the woman's voice came through clearly. She said, "Someone's upstairs again." Then the man's voice followed, also very clear. "He's been listening." I froze. They were talking about me. Somehow they knew I was there. Then the child's voice came, quiet and nervous. "Are we in trouble?" I stood up so fast I knocked over my tools. The voices stopped instantly, like someone had shut them off. The basement fell silent, except for my breathing and my pounding heart. I didn't sleep that night. I kept trying to convince myself it wasn't real, that maybe I was stressed or overworked. But I knew I wasn't imagining it. The voices were real, and they were coming from under the basement floor. The next morning, I made up my mind. I had to find out what was under there. I rented a concrete saw and waited for the weekend. Frank was out of town, so I didn't have to explain anything. On Saturday morning, I started cutting into that corner. The saw was loud and threw dust everywhere, but I kept at it, making a 4 by 4 foot square. The concrete was about 6 inches thick, and when I finally broke through, I could feel air rising from below. Cool air that smelled like dirt, and something else, something old and musty. I pulled away the broken pieces and shined my flashlight through the hole. There was definitely a space under there. I could see a bit of flooring, what looked like a wall, and maybe even furniture. The room was about 8 feet down and built from concrete blocks. I grabbed a ladder and climbed down. It was a single room, around 12 by 15 feet, with just enough headroom for me to stand. The floor was concrete and the walls were block, but it wasn't empty. In the center were 3 wooden chairs arranged in a circle, the kind you'd find in an old kitchen. On one chair was a blue sweater, folded neatly. On another was a man's felt hat, old and dusty. On the third sat a small stuffed teddy bear, missing one eye. But that wasn't the weirdest part. Along one wall was a shelf with things placed carefully on it. An old radio from the 1950s, a stack of yellowed newspapers, some books with warped covers, and several family photos. The pictures showed a man, a woman, and a young girl, all dressed like they were from the 1960s. I picked up one of the newspapers. The date was October 15th, 1968. The headline talked about the Vietnam War. I flipped through it. It all looked right for that time. But it wasn't just old. It looked like someone had been reading it recently. It was folded open to a specific article. That's when I heard footsteps above me. Slow, heavy steps moving across the basement. I looked up through the hole and saw a shadow pass over the edge. Someone was in my basement. I rushed up the ladder, but when I got to the top, no one was there. The door upstairs was still closed, just how I left it. But I swear the air smelled different, like cologne and mothballs. I went back down and grabbed the photos. I had to find out who these people were and what had happened to them. The pictures showed the same family over and over, in front of the house, inside what looked like the basement before it was finished, even a birthday party for the little girl. But one photo stood out. It showed just the man standing inside the secret room. He was smiling, but his eyes didn't look right. They seemed hollow, sad. On the back, in faded ink, were the words, "We're safe here." October 1968. I took the photos upstairs and began researching. It took me most of the day, but I eventually found a missing persons report from 1968. A family named the Hendersons had disappeared without a trace from their home in Detroit. Robert Henderson, age 42. Margaret Henderson, age 38. Susan Henderson, age 8. They vanished, leaving all their belongings behind. And the address on that report, it was my house. I went back down into the secret room that evening, taking the missing persons file with me. I sat down in one of the chairs, the one where the woman's folded sweater had been. I held the report in my hands and read it out loud. I told them I knew who they were now, that people had been searching for them all these years, and that they didn't have to stay hidden anymore. As I kept speaking, I felt a change in the air around me. The room didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt warmer, more open. The old, dusty smell faded away and was replaced by something softer and fresher. Then I heard the voices again, but this time they sounded different. The woman's voice came through clearly, and she sounded thankful. "Thank you," she said. Then the man's voice, calm and full of relief. "We can go now." And finally the child's voice, excited and full of hope. "Are we going home?" The voices slowly faded until everything went quiet, but the silence wasn't cold or scary anymore. It felt peaceful, like something had finally ended in the right way. After that night, I never heard the voices again. I closed up the hole in the concrete floor and called the police to tell them what I had found. They came and fully dug out the hidden space. Inside, they found the remains of the Henderson family. They had been there for over 50 years, hidden in a room that Robert Henderson had built as a shelter or secret hideout. The police later found out that Robert had gotten mixed up with some dangerous people back in 1968. He had seen something he shouldn't have, and instead of reporting it to the police, he tried to protect his family by hiding them in the basement, but they never came back up. I moved out of the house a few weeks later. I wasn't scared to stay there anymore, but it didn't feel right to keep living in a place that had been their home, their safe space, and sadly, their final resting place. They had waited for so long, half a century, for someone to find them, to remember them, and to let them go. The people who live there now probably don't know what lies underneath their basement floor. Frank filled the hole and poured new concrete over it, but sometimes I think about whether they ever hear anything at night when the house is completely quiet. If they do, I hope they stop and listen. I hope they care enough to wonder about what's hidden below. Because not every voice from beneath the floor is trying to scare you. Some are just hoping someone will finally listen. Our next story is from Sarah, a college student who found out that some basement secrets are better left alone. She was house sitting for her professor during winter break. It was a lovely old Victorian house with beauty, charm, and a lot of history. Maybe too much history. The house belonged to Dr. Martinez, my art history teacher. She was heading to Italy for 3 weeks during the break to do research for her new book. She needed someone to look after her home and feed her cats. The money was decent, and since the dorms were closed, I needed a place to stay anyway. The house was stunning, built in the 1880s, and still had all of its old features. High ceilings, detailed woodwork, and stained glass windows that cast colorful light over the wooden floors. Dr. Martinez had been fixing it up for over 15 years, and every room felt like a step back in time. She gave me a tour when I arrived and pointed out some things I needed to know, like how the bathroom door sometimes stuck, or how to adjust the old faucet, and that the thermostat could be fussy. She also told me that the basement was off limits, not because it was dangerous, but because she kept her work down there and didn't want it disturbed. That was fine with me. I had no reason to go into the basement. The rest of the house had everything I needed, and the guest room upstairs was comfortable. The cats, named Artemis and Apollo, were sweet and easy to take care of. Everything seemed perfect. The first week was just what I hoped for. I spent my days reading, catching up on shows, and enjoying the peaceful atmosphere. The neighborhood was old and quiet, filled with large trees and well-cared-for homes. During the day, I might hear a car drive by or see someone walking their dog, but otherwise it was calm and still. The cats had their own routines, and I quickly settled into mine. Morning coffee while they ate, reading in the afternoon sun in the living room, TV in the evening while they wandered the house like cats do when they think no one is watching. But in the second week, I started to hear something strange. I was upstairs in the guest room reading before bed when I heard music. It was a piano, faint but clearly coming from somewhere inside the house. The tune was classical, something I had heard before but couldn't name. It was being played slowly, with care, like someone was practicing. I went downstairs to see if maybe a radio had been left on, or if it was a neighbor playing music. But the more I walked through the house, the quieter it got. The music wasn't coming from outside or from any room I could reach. It was coming from the basement. I stood in front of the basement door listening. The piano was definitely being played down there. It wasn't loud, but I could hear each note. Whoever was playing had real skill and emotion. But the door was locked. Dr. Martinez had said not to go down there, and I respected that. So I went back upstairs. The music stopped after about 20 minutes. When Dr. Martinez called to check in the next day, I didn't bring it up. What could I even say? That someone was playing piano in her locked basement. She'd either think I was lying or losing my mind. But the piano music played again the next night. Same time, same song, same feeling. And again it came from the basement. I started thinking maybe there was some kind of fancy player piano set on a timer for security reasons. Rich people sometimes do weird things like that. On the third night, I made up my mind. I had to see what was down there. I felt a little bad going against her instructions, but I was too curious to stop myself. I searched the house and found a ring of keys in a drawer. I tried them one by one until the basement door finally unlocked. When I opened it, a wave of cool air came up and hit me. It smelled like old wood and flowers, maybe roses or jasmine. It was light and pleasant, not what I expected from a basement. I found the light switch and turned it on. The basement wasn't unfinished like I thought. It had been turned into a lovely room with wooden floors and patterned wallpaper. And in the center of the room stood a baby grand piano. It was stunning, with a shiny dark wood finish. The piano bench was slightly pulled out, and there was sheet music on the stand. I walked toward it slowly, nervous and curious. The music was written by hand in faded ink. At the top it said, "For Elizabeth with all my love, R.H. 1924." The paper was old and yellowed, and it felt delicate to the touch. I looked around the rest of the basement. It felt like an old music room. There were chairs set up like a small audience, a table with a crystal decanter and glasses, and photos framed along the walls. The picture showed people dressed in styles from the 1920s and 30s, many of them standing around the piano. One photo stood out. It showed a young woman sitting at the piano with her hands on the keys like she was about to play. She had dark hair done in an old-fashioned style and wore a beautiful, fancy dress. At the bottom of the picture, written in the same handwriting as the music, were the words Elizabeth 1924. Then I heard footsteps upstairs, heavy, slow steps moving across the floor above me. But I was alone in the house. The cats weren't heavy enough to make that sound. These were human footsteps. I turned off the lights in the basement and went up the stairs trying to hear more. The steps kept going from room to room, like someone was searching for something. I reached the top and peeked into the hallway. No one was there, but I heard the steps in the living room. Slow, steady, as if someone was carefully looking through the space. I turned on my phone flashlight and walked toward the sound. As soon as I entered the room, the steps stopped. Everything looked normal, but the air felt strange, like someone had just left. Then I heard the piano again, but this time I was upstairs and the music was coming from below. Someone was playing the same soft melody. I rushed to the basement door. It was closed. I knew I'd left it open. I unlocked it again and went downstairs. The bench had been moved and the music was open to a new page. The cushion had a dent, like someone had just sat there. The smell of roses was stronger now, almost too much. I sat on the bench and looked at the new sheet. The piece was called Elizabeth's Waltz, signed by R.H. I put my fingers on the keys and tried a few notes. The piano was in perfect tune. As I played, I felt someone behind me. It didn't feel scary, but I knew I wasn't alone. I turned around and saw her, a young woman in a 1920s dress, standing by the chairs listening. She looked almost see-through, like a reflection in water. But I could see her. She smiled at me, a sad but thankful smile. Then she was gone. I spent the rest of the night in the basement, playing the piano and looking at the old photos. I found more music, all handwritten and signed R.H. The songs were full of emotion, filled with love and sadness. In an old photo album, I found out everything. Elizabeth and Robert had been engaged in 1924. He was a composer. She was a pianist. They were going to get married in the spring of 1925, but Elizabeth got sick with tuberculosis and died in February. Robert was heartbroken. He turned the basement into a music room to remember her and spent the next 40 years playing music for her alone. He died in 1965 and left the house to the city. In his will, he asked for the basement to stay untouched. Dr. Martinez bought the house from the city in the 1990s. She fixed up the top floors but followed Robert's request and kept the basement just as he left it. She never told me about Elizabeth or Robert, but she kept their memory alive. I played piano down there every night until the end of my stay. Sometimes I felt Elizabeth there. Sometimes I didn't. But it always felt like someone was listening, someone who loved the music deeply. When Dr. Martinez came home from Italy, I told her everything. She wasn't upset. She said she had been waiting for someone to discover the music room, someone who would understand. She told me she had heard the piano before too, but never saw Elizabeth. I still visit sometimes. Dr. Martinez gave me a key to the basement. I go there when I need peace or inspiration. I play Robert's songs and sometimes I write my own. The piano is always in tune. The air always smells like roses. I believe Elizabeth is still there, listening to the music made just for her, waiting for Robert to finish the song he started 100 years ago. And maybe that's okay. Maybe love like that doesn't need an ending. Maybe it just needs someone to keep playing the music. These stories have taken us through some deeply unsettling moments, from lonely cabins watched by hidden eyes to cruise ships with secret cameras and secret passageways. We've heard real accounts of control, fear, and the painful truth that sometimes the people we think we can trust are the ones we should fear the most. But these stories remind us of something important. Always trust your gut, pay attention to what's around you, and never stay in a situation that feels wrong. Your safety is always more important than the trip, the job, or the experience. Stay sharp out there, and thank you for joining me for another round of true horror stories. When the news headlines shouted, "Local man tortured in basement," I couldn't help but be curious. I never imagined that I would be in the same position, not even a week later. According to the reports, a group of armed men had broken into the home of a local jewel dealer. They were looking for a stash of diamonds that he was rumored to keep hidden at his house. They caught him by surprise and demanded to know where the diamonds were. But the man told them the truth. There was no hidden stash. The only thing of value he had was an empty safe inside his bedroom closet. That answer didn't sit well with the robbers. They didn't believe him, and for the next hour, they tortured him, hoping he'd reveal the location of something that didn't even exist. It wasn't until a neighbor, curious about the noise, showed up that the gang finally ran away. By then, the man was barely alive and would have died without immediate help. It was a horrifying situation, no doubt. But even after hearing about it, I never once thought I might be in danger myself. My wealth was pretty modest. I had about $25,000 worth of valuables, mostly made up of an old coin collection made of gold and silver from the 1800s that my dad had left me. I had gotten the collection appraised the year before. The appraiser offered me $10,000 for it, but I decided to keep it. I stored the coins in a floor safe and didn't think much about it afterward. Maybe that's how I ended up being a target. A little over a week later, I was just relaxing on my couch watching a movie. It was about 2 p.m. on a Saturday when I heard a loud crash at the front door. The sound startled me, and I turned to see three masked men pushing through the broken doorway. Before I could even react, they had surrounded me with their guns aimed straight at me. They shouted for me to get on my knees, and I did, with my heart racing and my mouth going completely dry. Instead of shooting, one of them asked me for the combination to my safe. That's when it hit me. These were the same guys who had tortured the jeweler. I tried to lie. I said I didn't have a safe. I said, why would I even own one? But I wasn't very convincing. My fear made it hard to keep a straight face. One of them, the shortest, hit me hard with the barrel of his gun to fix my attitude. Still, I didn't give them the code. I wasn't just being stubborn. I felt like I couldn't let my father's hard work be taken by these thugs. Maybe I wasn't thinking clearly, but I just couldn't give in. In hindsight, I probably should have handled it differently. They gave me many chances to cooperate, but once they tied me up in the basement, they stopped playing around. As they tightened the ropes and put a gag in my mouth, I still thought they were just trying to scare me. I figured after what happened with the jeweler, they wouldn't do something so brutal again. I was very wrong. Right from the start, one of them smashed my left hand with a hammer. The pain was beyond anything I had ever felt. Then they did the same to my right hand, and somehow, that was even worse. I was ready to tell them anything by then, but I had already made them angry, and they were going to make me suffer for it. After my hands, they went after my feet and then my knees. I was barely conscious at that point. Only then did they let me speak. While one of them went upstairs, the other two stood whispering in the corner. I could only imagine what they were planning. I thought maybe since they had kept their faces hidden, they wouldn't want to add murder to the list. That gave me a bit of hope. I truly believed I'd live to see morning. The next few hours were mostly a blur. The shock and pain kept hitting me in waves. I fainted more than once. At certain moments, I even wished I would just die so the pain would stop. But somehow, death never came. I don't know when they left. I couldn't even tell you how long I was tied up. I only learned later from my son. Yes, my son was the reason I survived. His stubbornness saved me, just like my stubbornness nearly got me killed. After trying to call me several times with no answer, he assumed I was avoiding him. He drove 45 miles just to confront me. When I heard his voice calling from the basement stairs, I thought I was dreaming. Then I felt someone lifting me, and at first I believed the robbers were back to finish the job. But these were paramedics. Their faces were visible, and for a moment I thought it was the end. But my son held my shoulders and gently told me I was safe. Everything was finally over. What came next isn't hard to guess. I spent a long time in the hospital. There were many surgeries and recovery wasn't quick. I had to deal with casts, and for a time I needed a wheelchair. I've healed mostly now. Cold and damp weather still bothers me a lot, but after moving to the south, I rarely feel that pain. As strange as it sounds, I don't carry any deep anger toward the people who did this. They took something important from me, but they also gave me something even more precious, my life. Still, I did feel relief when I found out they had been caught 7 months later. Only a few coins were recovered. Most of the collection had already been sold off. I was surprised to get anything back at all. Right now, all of those men are serving long prison sentences, 30 years or more. I went back to work briefly after recovering, but eventually retired. Now I spend my time doing things I enjoy, like fishing and hunting. That terrible event taught me something very important. Life is short and fragile, and every day is worth cherishing. I would gladly give up 100 coin collections just to spend another day with the people I love. Sorry, Dad, but I think you'd understand. Stay safe, everyone. When we're kids, we don't always listen to the grown-ups around us. Part of growing up is testing limits, because if we don't, we'll never learn where those limits really are. That's just how life works. Adults know this and usually try to let us figure things out for ourselves. But when needed, they'll step in and stop us if it's for our own good. I understand that now, and I did the same for my own kids when they were young. But there was a time when I didn't want to hear advice from anyone. I pushed limits over and over and never seemed to learn my lesson. That is, not until the time I almost died. As a kid, I was a handful, too much for my mother, in fact. My father had been shot and killed in Vietnam when I was just 2 years old. My mother never remarried, and both my grandfathers were gone. I didn't have a male figure in my life, and though my mom tried, she couldn't really be that person for me. This was a different time back then, and my mom was a simple woman from a small town. I was old enough to notice she was tired, and she wasn't very forceful. Naturally, I took advantage of that. I wasn't getting into real trouble yet, but my mom was afraid it was coming. She started looking for a way to handle me, and soon she came up with an idea. Spring break was around the corner, and she needed someone to watch me during the day. That's when my dad's mother, Granny Jean, became part of the plan. Mom and Granny Jean didn't really get along, but they stayed polite for the most part. As I would soon find out, Granny Jean was exactly the person I needed. She'd grown up during the Great Depression, and it had made her strong. She was tough, didn't tolerate nonsense, but she still had a caring side when the time was right. She and my mom talked on the phone, and she agreed to take care of me for the week. I left for her farm that Sunday morning and arrived by bus later that day. For a 9-year-old, it was a long and intimidating trip. Not that I would have admitted it. Granny Jean picked me up from the station, and we drove the 25 miles back to her farm without saying much. The only sound was a preacher talking on the radio. I tried to say something once, but got a sharp look from her and decided I was better off staying quiet. It wasn't until the next morning at breakfast that she finally spoke to me. After that, she gave me a fast lesson in how to feed the animals, then left me to find my own fun. Naturally, that meant I went out looking for mischief. I spent most of the day walking across fields and exploring the woods. I went back to the house briefly for lunch, then headed out again. Around 4 p.m., I came across an old rundown farmhouse. It was huge, 2 stories tall with a big wraparound porch. I couldn't resist the urge to check it out. I peeked through the windows first to make sure it was empty. When I saw no one, I walked around to the back and went inside. There wasn't much left in there, but to me it felt like a massive clubhouse. It was getting late, so I left with full plans to come back later. That evening at dinner, I mentioned the old house. As soon as I did, Granny Jean snapped at me. "That's not your place. Don't go back there. It's old and not safe. You understand?" Her reaction startled me, and I quickly replied, "Yes, ma'am." I surprised myself by saying that. I wasn't used to respecting grown-ups, but she had full control of the moment, and she knew it. Well, almost full control. That night in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about that old house. There was still so much to see, and I felt like I had to go back. So the next morning I did just that. On my way out, I borrowed a flashlight and headed straight for the house. I picked up where I'd left off the day before and climbed the creaky old stairs to the second floor. If I had been smarter about old houses, I might have looked for the attic. I think I saw a door that led to it, but since it was locked, I moved on. There was still plenty to explore. Eventually, I went back to the kitchen where I noticed a door I hadn't opened yet. It was stuck, but after a few strong pulls, I got it open. A staircase led down into a dark basement. The darkness seemed to call out to me. Holding the flashlight, I walked down the steps. One of the steps had rotted away, and I had to jump over it. It's a miracle the next step held my weight. When I reached the bottom, I used the flashlight to scan the room. I couldn't see much from where I stood, so I made the mistake of walking farther in. After a couple of steps, the door above me slammed shut. I still don't know what caused it. Maybe it was wind, but I thought I had closed the back door behind me. Then again, I've never been good about closing doors. So even if it's unlikely, it's possible. I won't even consider the crazier explanations. I rushed back up the stairs, skipping 2 or 3 at a time. I threw myself against the door again and again, but it wouldn't open. I was trapped. Panic set in. Then I suddenly remembered the big swinging doors I'd seen the day before. I raced back down the stairs, jumping steps in pairs, but this time one of them broke, and I fell hard onto the floor. The basement was darker now. My flashlight had gone out. I shook it and it flickered back on. I stood up and ran toward the large wooden doors. They opened outward and were heavy. I threw myself against them with everything I had, but nothing happened. I tried twice more, but they wouldn't budge. I was worn out. I stopped to catch my breath and think. I closed my eyes and tried to remember how the doors looked from the outside. I pictured every detail, every nail, every board. That's when it hit me. I remembered a thick wooden plank across the doors on the outside. It was like a big 2x4 held tight under 4 metal brackets. My last bit of hope started to slip away. Still, I didn't give up right away. I walked around the room, checking every corner. I found a couple of small windows. Maybe if I broke them, I could escape. I grabbed a brick and threw it, but it bounced right off. I didn't know then, but those windows were made of storm-proof reinforced glass. My hope was running out, no matter how determined I was. As the hours passed, my fear grew stronger. Things got much worse when night arrived. Even though the days were warm, the nights still dropped below freezing. As the sun set, the cold in the basement became unbearable. Around 11 p.m., the flashlight finally died for good. Shaking it did nothing. Without moonlight, I was in complete darkness. Then I heard rats scurrying around me. That was even scarier than the cold. I imagined them chewing on my hands and feet while I was too weak to move. I tried not to fall asleep, but staying awake became harder and harder. I knew if I slept, I might never wake up. I was sure someone would come looking, but would they find me in time? Somewhere in the early hours, I passed out. In that dreamlike state, I felt like my soul was floating upward. I wasn't cold anymore. I felt warm, and the pain was gone. I thought maybe I had died and gone to heaven, but luckily it wasn't my time yet. I woke up the next morning, not in heaven, but back in my bed. The smell of baked food drifted up from the kitchen, and everything felt confusing. Was it all just a dream? I looked around. Everything looked normal. The sun came through the lace curtains. Granny Jean's cat, Rags, was curled up in a chair watching me. I had on my favorite flannel pajamas. Everything seemed fine, but deep down, something still felt wrong. I quietly got up and put on my robe, trying not to ruin the peace of the morning. Rags followed me as I tiptoed downstairs. The rotten basement stairs flashed through my mind. Maybe I was in hell instead. Maybe this was my punishment for being such a hard-headed kid. That would have been a harsh ending. I expected rats to appear at any moment. Maybe Rags was their leader. He ran ahead, turned the corner, and I braced myself. But nothing happened. When I got to the kitchen, I saw Granny Jean from behind. Her gray hair was pulled up in a bun, and she was sitting at the table. The soft sounds of old music came from the radio. I just stood there watching her. Something still felt off, but everything looked calm. A few minutes went by, then she turned around in her chair and smiled. "Good morning," she said kindly. I walked into the kitchen, still unsure of what to say. "Are you hungry?" she asked. Her voice felt warm and comforting, but something still felt unsettled inside me. "Yes," I replied quickly. I stood still while she cooked, not saying a word. She moved around the kitchen, maybe already sensing the storm of emotions I was trying to hide. She cracked 2 eggs into a pan, and the smell of bacon filled the room. Then she said, "We don't need to talk about what happened last night. He's safe now, and I'm sure a boy as stubborn as you learned something from it." The wave of relief I felt was more than I can explain. I tried not to cry, but a few tears escaped anyway. I turned away from her and said softly, "No, ma'am. I understand now how difficult I've been, and I'm sorry." That was it. She put my breakfast on the plate, and I sat with her and ate. We didn't speak. The soft music from the radio mixed with the warm smell of breakfast and made everything feel safe. For the rest of my visit, I stayed close to the house. There were reruns on TV and plenty of chores to keep me busy. I had meant what I said that morning. It was like a curtain had been pulled away from my eyes. All the trouble I'd caused, all the stubborn behavior, it had led me to that cold basement. The adults in my life had only wanted what was best for me. But all I heard back then was, no. The version of me from before that night. He didn't survive. When the week ended, Granny Jean drove me back to the bus station. As we said goodbye, she gave me a quick kiss on the cheek. I'd never felt more thankful. I still hold a special place in my heart for her. As I headed toward the bus, I turned back and waved. If I'd known that would be the last time I saw her, I would have thanked her for everything. She didn't just save my body that cold night, she did something even greater. She saved my soul.